Hi, Patrick. Thank you again for giving me an hour of your time this afternoon. So, for the audience, you're currently working as an assistant psychologist. And I said to you, you're the first one that I've managed to persuade to speak with me. So, particular thank you for that. And if we take you back to the beginning, what was it? Where did your interest in psychology come from?
My earliest memory of wanting to be a psychologist dates back to even pre-adolescent years.
Uh huh.
I've always been a very observant child. I was very curious about a lot of things, and I kind of dabbled into the music a little bit. I've heard of a man called Ludwig Beethoven and
I've
listened
heard
to
of him.
yeah. So I listened to his music and I noticed the pattern. And I've always asked myself, why is it always very dark? Has he been such an angry man? Had he lived his life full of disappointment and hate over things? So those are the questions that I was asking myself, probably when I was 9 or 10.
You really are a psychologist. I love that. I mean, I would be
Yeah,
doing that like as an adult. I get curious
yeah.
about artists' stories and what's made them and what the difference even sometimes between what we perceive of their work
Hmm.
compared to how they might have
Yeah,
experienced
that's
it. But
absolutely right. And then I started looking at paintings, and again, I was asking the same questions. It was until when I was about 12, one of my school teachers is an educational psychologist as well. And he told me a little bit about, he taught us the Howard Gardner's window and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that piqued my interest. Around that time, my brother was the last of the students, age 16 years old, to attend university in the Philippines, where I grew up.
mhm.
I attended the open day in one of the top science universities in the country with him. I found myself in the psychology department. And I knew then that the options were either clinical practice, occupational practice, or educational practice. Those are the three specialties that the university was looking into.
Mhm.
And I was very, very fixated on the clinical psychology aspect.
And was that the first time when you kind of connected your curiosity about people with psychology? Is that the first time you kind of knew what that was?
I think I had an idea, but that was the most formal approach, and
Mm.
that was where it was reinforced that this my curiosity is psychology.
Yeah. So you went to uni in the Philippines?
No, it
No?
was just an open day,
Okay.
where I was just curious what's going on in university. Um, and from then on, I moved to the UK when I was 15. I did my GCSEs here. I did my A levels here. There was no question about it. Everyone was having identity crisis. They didn't know what they were going to do. They were unsure. They wanted to explore every open days or every department there is available. I just knew I was going to do psychology.
Yeah.
There was no
Easy.
negotiation. I was going to do it.
Yeah. And did you do it at A level?
I did it for A levels, yeah.
Yep. Um,
And I did my degree, bachelor's degree in University of Essex.
and having learnt about sort of some of the different areas of psychology from that open day in the Philippines, what happened as you went through your degree? Were you thinking, I want to be a clinical psychologist? Did you want to be an educational psychologist like your teacher? What was
Mm.
that kind of journey like for you?
I always knew that I was interested in children. I was 15 when I was exposed to the idea of tabula rasa, that everybody is a blank slate and we learn from experience. We learn what we are taught, that type of things. And so I was also very good with children. I loved babysitting.
Uh
I
huh.
loved looking after everyone. And so I thought that there is this particular quote from the national hero of the Philippines. They teach you everything about him from a young age. And he was kind of a child genius. And one of the things that he wrote is that the children are the hope of tomorrow, if translated directly. And that always resonates to me in a lot of the things that I do. So I
Mm.
thought that working with children from backgrounds of difficulty would be the mission that I want to achieve in my life. That would make a whole difference to everything. And you see all these problems in the news, mass murder, corruption, things like that. And I thought all of these things are avoidable if we act early.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've always been very focused on developmental psychology during my bachelor days. Interestingly, the highest grade that I ever got during my degree is from a developmental psychology module. And it was, I think that was happening during lockdown. And it was a Monday morning lecture. So it was happening online for the first time ever, and I was asleep for the half of it. I couldn't help it. It was very cold. It was gloomy, and I was very comfortable where I was sat, and I would fall asleep. But as I said, it was oddly enough the highest grade I've ever gotten.
Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can take information in when we're asleep. That would be so handy, wouldn't it?
Probably asleep, sleepwalking at that time, and gaining information. It's not something that I would recommend to all the audience,
No,
but
but it works for you.
it worked for me, and I suppose a part of me feels that that was fate in terms of what I would be practicing, or kind of a glimpse of what my career would look like.
Yes. And then what did you do when you finished your degree?
When I finished my degree, I worked in a school. It was a special education school run by Autism Anglia. So the specialty is
Hmm.
that every single student have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And a lot of times they have comorbidity with other problems. It was a very interesting observation. Thinking about it now, I reflected that when I graduated, I was so good at understanding what their problems were, but I didn't know what to do with it or how to help them.
Mm.
They have these one-page sheets, essentially to hand over to you what are the most important do's and don'ts, or best way and the most unhelpful way to manage your students. And I loved it. I loved it. I understood every single detail. But that's when you realize that that's where your clinical skills matter. That you don't just have to understand them, but you also have to know what to do, and to know what approach works for you, that it wouldn't work for everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and of course, students with autism are
Mm-hmm.
going to they're going to be challenged in different ways. They're going to
Yeah,
need different
yeah.
kinds of intervention. Um, so you were reflecting on, yeah, you understood what they were struggling with. You didn't know
I just didn't
necessarily
know
at
how
that
to support
stage
them.
how to
Yeah.
help, how to support them. Um,
So the academic skills were there. It's the
yeah,
practical application was lacking.
yes. Well, don't give
Uh,
yourself a hard time. You know, it's we can always look back, can't we, and sort of
yeah,
think, oh,
definitely.
I could do that better now. Of course, we
Yeah,
could.
yeah,
But
and that is an experience that I always look back on, where I feel like I'm lost for answers. It's a journey, it's a process, and I like to
yeah,
remind the audience that it, it's it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't do that finish and then you qualify. It isn't. It's not just about learning what you have to learn. It's also looking back into yourself. What is important to you? And a lot of the interventions that we will eventually use for our clients also reflect back in how does that matter to you? What is your experience with it?
yeah. And what would you say were sort of some of the main kind of learnings for you in that role?
Um, don't be afraid. Ask.
Yeah, nice.
Um, if you don't know, ask. If you're not sure, ask, speak, communicate.
Yeah,
Because often I find that the client that you're working with is more than happy to tell you. So even if you're lost for staff, members of the team that would help you, your clients would tell you.
yeah, yeah, nice. So really, yeah, forming that strong relationship with people
Yeah.
you work with,
And
understanding
you're
the
absolutely
uniqueness
right.
of
It
them.
fosters such an amazing rapport with your clients just by knowing that you're there to listen to them. Um,
Yeah.
and so that also translates into what we can do about our experiences. I was not afraid to do any job. After I worked in the school, I was a healthcare assistant in an older adult psychiatric ward.
Hmm.
Did all the nursing job, personal care. Um, Unfortunately, had to restrain a few people. Um, Working in that acute phase is quite a difficult setting, and that also exposes you to the challenges that the whole organization, the whole NHS has a whole. You hear about the frustrations of the families, the patients, the gaps in services, and things like
Yeah.
that. I also became a discharge coordinator, which, in my opinion, apart from being an assistant psychologist, is the best thing I've ever done.
Tell me more.
Um, because when you're the discharge coordinator, at least in that context, I was an associate practitioner, which means you're not qualified in any discipline. However, you are trusted to be able to communicate or to be able to do interventions
Hmm.
that would relate to the specialty of what you're working with. And at that point, it was nursing. Um, my job involved managing a case where we need to ensure that a patient would be discharged in the safest means possible, and that readmission to the hospital is going to be an absolute last case scenario or worst case scenario.
Hmm.
There, I was exposed to the differences in the disciplines of every single member of the team, how a doctor speaks, how your psychologist speaks, how the OTs and the physios work together, and how all of them are conflicting with what the nurses will tell you, as well as social workers would tell you.
Yeah. This
You're
is
left
so
in the middle.
interesting because it's a big part, isn't it, of gaining experience as a psychologist
Yes.
to understand what the different professions do, what their different priorities will be, what the points of conflict will
Mm,
be. I can imagine that you would have quite often had some members of the team saying that somebody was ready to go home, and other members of the team saying, absolutely
no,
not.
yeah.
We need this, this, and this in place
And
before it can happen.
it's also the family dynamic. You will be exposed to that.
Yeah.
How are there anyone there supporting your client?
Mm,
How supporting are they going to be? What do they want? Are they acting in the best interest of your client when your client's not able to make the decisions for you? So
yes.
it's a start of when we think about later, when we think about the systemic approach, it's a good model to observe.
Mm, absolutely. I always remember hearing about some research
Mm,
from how A&E staff
mm,
used to ask people, have you got someone at home? And if that person said, yes, I have, they would think, well, that's great because that person can look after you when you get home. And then they were realizing that actually that person might not be able to support their
mm,
patient. That person might need a high level of support.
mm,
So they needed more information about, well, actually, who is at home? Um, have you got someone at home who's able to give you emotional support or practical support? Have you got people relying on you, depending on you,
yeah,
actually who might be getting in the way of your recovery because they need such a lot from you.
Yeah.
So that's sitting in my head as you're talking about that. So I'm thinking, yeah, you'd have some families very well able to support the
Mm.
patients you're discharging, and some with their own mental health concerns, physical health concerns. Um,
Absolutely. And sometimes, even if it meant that even though someone's going to be at home with them, what makes them fit to look after the now heavier needs of their loved ones?
yes, yeah. So you're talking really positively about that job. I can imagine it will have had its very challenging moments.
It was a very challenging moment. You have to manage the conflicts. You have to be absolutely in the center of all of it. You have to be very centrist in balancing that. Although you understand the concerns of the family, we also have service pressures, bed
Yeah,
pressures.
yeah, you've got to get people out because you've got other people needing to come
Yeah,
in.
yeah, and although you're not the one making decisions at that time, but having to process all of that and having to effectively communicate that to a very distressed patient or to
Mm.
their loved ones who absolutely hates you because you're just discharging their loved ones in their opinion you know pre-morbidly or not ready prematurely.
Yeah, yeah,
It's quite a difficult thing to do. And like I said, I don't think that I've gotten a most better experience than that. Alongside that, it also exposes you that the NHS is a system. There is a pathway from being an acute to being preparing for discharge, and even when you're discharged, what systems are in place to prevent readmission and what
mm,
systems are in place to support that individual. It is a pathway. Every single one of them have commissioning rules. Every single one of them have triages, and every single one of them have gatekeepers. And it's about familiarizing and recognizing that all of those things have to fit in place. And it's the
yeah,
same way when you think about becoming a psychologist. You don't just think at the end of our 10 sessions, for example, that's the end of it. You have to think about what other services are also available for them.
yeah. And taking on this work in older people's mental health services, given what you've said about, your strong
Mhm.
interest in developmental psychology
Yeah.
and supporting children and young people,
Mm.
was this a kind of tactical move? Were you thinking, oh, it would be good for me to kind of get a breadth of experience? Yeah.
I think Jenny, that's a very good and very good question and very insightful actually. At that point in time, my idea was to get to the doors of the NHS. It doesn't matter what job is available for me, as long as it's loosely transferable skills. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna do it because once you're in the NHS, it feels like it's easier to work in a different role because you're already within the organization.
Yeah.
However, I think about it now from a neuropsychological perspective, what I did was probably one of the best decisions, and I didn't know it until now. When we think of old age, it's the same process that Piaget teaches us. People learn in 5 stages. And we think of dementia as the end stage because it's degenerative and it's often progressive, and you go back into um, the first stage. So it's basically Piaget's. In my very, very loosely, in my little world, I think that it's Piaget's theory of learning in reverse.
Interesting.
I also think of brain injuries, who technically I previously worked in, and I now work in. I think of it as 5 stages. Three doesn't work. How does the other four still work together? That's how I like to think of it. It's a very
Yes.
playful metaphor.
Yeah. And for people who are listening but haven't studied psychology yet, what would be these different stages? You're testing my memory when we're talking about
Yeah,
Piaget.
that's a
Remind
very good
remind
point.
me of the
Yeah.
different phases?
So we start with a blank slate where we have a child. They don't really process a lot of information. And then we start to learn object permanence, which is the idea that, from a neuropsychological perspective, I think of it now as working memory. The idea that we know something is there,
Mm-hmm.
even though we don't see it.
Yep.
And then you start to have higher complex processes such as logical reasoning, emotional explanations, arithmetic, things like that, up to ethical discourse at the stages of it. When someone develops dementia, they start having memory problems. They start having issues with semantics, as in not knowing what something is, can't find the word for it, things like that. And at the very end stage or very advanced dementia, we would often expect that they go back into a childlike state where everything is all about feelings, knowing that something is there even though they don't see it. And sometimes we don't even know if what they're thinking about actually exists.
That's interesting. And I love this idea. I remember early on in my psychology career, almost
Mm,
sort of like feeling like if I worked with a different group of people,
yeah.
so my assistant psychologist post
Mm,
was in learning disabilities, and then starting my clinical training and starting to work with adults with mental health problems, it sometimes felt like I had to kind of leave all of that behind and then start
mhm,
again, new models,
mm,
new frameworks, new
yeah.
ways of thinking. And of course, it's not like that, is it? We can transfer our knowledge
Yes,
from one area to another.
definitely.
Um, yeah, and I haven't thought about that before. I thought about applying developmental psychology. I haven't worked in older people's mental health since I was
Mhm.
training. So that's new for me to be thinking about using developmental psychology to make sense of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as well because we neuropsychologists also use psychodynamic theories. For example, one of the models and frameworks that I'm particularly fond of is called the Kitwood model. So the Kitwood model is, I think it was originally designed for people with dementia to be able
Mm-hmm.
to include the five flowers. I have to go on top of my head. It talks about inclusivity, occupation, love, attachments, and identity. So all of that when your client is sometimes unable to give you a reliable information. So we have to find that from people who knows this very well, from what we know, from history and all that. And one of the ways to think about Kitwood model is to think of the attachment theories. How does a person become comfortable? What do they use historically to soothe themselves? What are the things that are important to them? What matters to them? Because
Yeah,
in an instance where they think that they are in, for example, in a war zone, because that was a significant part of their life. What was it that calmed them down when everything was in distress?
yeah,
And if you think about it, at that period in time, attachment was very disorganized. They probably didn't have the same warmth that we preach now as they did when they were growing up. And
yeah,
so having tough love is probably how they would respond better to you rather than trying to, in their eyes, you would be patronizing them by giving them warmth and affection.
yeah. What you're doing, that's alien to me. Um, yeah, this is a very human, very respectful way of, and again, it's making sense, isn't it? It's making
Mm,
meaning.
mm.
I feel like you're taking us right back to the way you were thinking about Beethoven.
Yes.
And you're thinking like, who was he? Why is he writing such angry music? Like, what is that?
Mm.
What's going on? What's happened in his life? What experiences has he had to make him angry? To make him write angry music? Um, it's the same sort of questions,
Yeah.
and only now you've got the frameworks that you didn't have as a 9 year old.
Mhm.
Um, so you're kind of taking these different models, different theories.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, so for the audience, I definitely would say that it's a vocation, it's a passion. It's not something you think because it's convenient. Or one thing that I've heard also is because someone from my cohort when I was uh in the Philippines before I moved in, they said that they wanted to do psychology so they can read boys' minds. To think that we can use psychology to read men's mind if they were playing with them. it it's it doesn't quite work that way. It is an identity that we embody, is how I see it. And
Yeah,
for me, the identity goes back to that young boy asking questions why someone is very sad.
yeah. And carrying on your journey, so you
Yeah.
had your working in older people's mental health, working on the
Mhm.
ward, working as a discharge coordinator. Was it from there that you went into neuropsychology?
Yes, that's right. It was from there that I started working in neuropsychology. My very first assistant psychology role was working with the memory assessment pathway. So we were doing tests, a battery of tests that was designed in-house to detect the early symptoms of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
So our reporting and our assessment complements an MDT approach to diagnosing whether or not someone has dementia.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for a couple of months and I found myself in neuro rehab. Neuro rehab is quite a small team, very specialist in looking after people with traumatic brain injuries, neurological conditions apart from dementia and stroke, because stroke has specific
Okay.
looking after them. So we'd be working with people with I've already mentioned brain injuries, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, those type of things. I reflect on it thinking in that context that, for example, brain injury is something you probably would acquire tomorrow. You never expect it. You have an accident and then all of a sudden you have a brain injury. And it is very frustrating because it's a life-changing experience.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, for example, if someone were diagnosed with cancer, it sucks. You know, it's a bad thing to be diagnosed of. But although you're positive on something, you would expect worsening conditions. That's not the case with brain injuries. You wake up with it the next day, and for the rest of your life, it's a very, very different experience.
I wonder if it's interesting when you make that comparison there with cancer,
Mm.
and that makes me think that not that we'd know what to expect if we were diagnosed with
Yeah.
cancer, because that, of course, it would be a horrible shock, and there are so many different kinds of cancers and so many different
Mhm.
kinds of treatments and prognosis. But I'm wondering whether brain injury is further outside of people's kind of experience. That I feel like we don't see it very much, and we'd have less of a kind of template to draw on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It might
yeah,
be harder for, and I'm thinking for patients and their families
yeah,
to
I,
understand, like, what is this?
I definitely agree. Because sometimes people with brain injuries, it's not even apparent that they have brain injuries until you start talking to them, or until you
Mm-hmm.
start living with them. Whereas you know, I don't want to be absolute morbid about it, but sometimes people with cancer, you would expect they had cancer because of how they present, very pale sometimes. Sometimes they lost a lot of tone, weight, um, effects such as hair loss as well, those type of things. And it's widely available in the media that people talk about cancer being an absolutely horrible thing. And we will never say that we know exactly what you're feeling or how you're dealing with it. But you're right, there is a level of expectation that um, sometimes people do get better. There is treatment, and we are getting better at treating it.
Yeah.
But we also expect deterioration. with brain injuries, we don't often see that. We just see someone with the waking up, like you said, the next day, and they're living life totally new, unfounded experience.
Yes. And what would you say, again, sort of thinking about your career development,
Mhm.
your sort of learning and growth? What did that experience give you, or what were some of the things it gave you?
Made me look at my hands and use it in a way that I've never thought of. I can touch a pen. I can write properly. I can drink my cup. Little things that we don't think about, but
Yeah,
in the context of our clinics, these are functional goals that people hope to achieve.
yeah,
And remember, they woke up the next day not being able to do that anymore.
yeah. Well, that's really got me thinking. Yeah. So appreciating how lucky we are,
Yeah,
and thinking about how complex that is. Talk about picking up a pen, we can do that really easily.
yeah.
But then when you start thinking about what's having to happen between my brain and my hand to be able to do that, it is very complex, isn't it?
Mm.
Um, and I'm thinking about my son who's just finished his A-level psychology,
Hmm.
and how much we learn about brain
Yeah,
function
yeah.
through observations of this form of brain injury, that form of brain injury. Um, that's the sort of reciprocity between what we see and
Mhm.
what we understand. Um, yeah, and then bringing us, I think we're sort of bang up to date. If we can now come into your current role.
Yes, yes. So my current role is, I would say, one in a million, if not a billion, opportunity. I had been in a privileged position to support my the division that I work under, to make efforts into starting a psychology team for the stroke rehab or the stroke pathway in Colchester and Tendring community. Um, Historically, the stroke ward had psychologists, but she left and had not been replaced for many reasons, which we don't have time for,
Yeah.
but had now found commissioning for it. So my role would be supporting people who have had a stroke from the ward and from when they get discharged in the community.
Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? I did
Mhm.
some work with
Yeah.
patients that had strokes as part of one of my
Hmm.
placements when I was
Hmm.
training, and I found it really interesting that you could sort of divide the work into two elements. That
Yeah.
part of what I was doing was
Yeah.
some neuropsychological testing,
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
sort of I can't speak, impairments in functioning, perhaps in memory and language,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But also for some people it was less around a kind of neuropsychology of it and more around perhaps that adaptation to whether it was temporary or permanent disability. I kind of quite liked that mixture of the neuropsych as well as the more emotion focused work.
Yeah, yeah, you're almost spot on there, actually. So it is right to think of the role as split between cognitive assessments, as well as the emotional support or talking therapies for your clients. Um, but one thing is very important in thinking as well is I don't just see myself as the. It's very important for me to say that I don't just see myself as the assessment person. I also want to get my hands dirty and be involved in the rehab efforts. So, as I said earlier, I remember very early on after I've graduated, it's it's not just about knowing or finding out what the problem is from an academic perspective and being able to explain that to someone. It's also about knowing the practical applications. How can you use that? How can we use the strengths and weakness profile to find compensatory strategies to help themselves regain the functional goal that they wanted?
Yeah.
And it's still a development now. I don't think that I know everything. And there are cases where you have a light bulb moment thinking, what if we try this? You've never thought of that before, and then you just come up with it. Somebody says something, and then you have a brilliant idea as a team. We can try this. Yeah, so
Play.
it's a journey. It's an adventure.
Yes. And it will be throughout your whole career. Um, yeah, I think I've said to you before, like one of the great things about being a psychologist is that we're continually learning, we're continually
Yes.
trying different things, developing our skills more and more. And given where you started with this interest in
Yeah.
developmental and child psychology,
Mhm.
um, where do you hope you'll be? Let's kind of jump forward 5 years in time. Um,
I think that's a very difficult question to answer. My supervisor clearly thinks that I will be a neuropsychologist.
uh-huh.
Um, I think that I just want to work anywhere that would take me. I just want to make a difference. That's a
Yeah.
life statement that I've always said myself. I just want to make a difference. I just want to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Um, and thinking about it now, actually, I reflect on this year. As you know, every year there is a recruitment drive for the new trainees. I didn't get in this year.
And this was applying for clinical training.
Clinical psychology
Yeah.
doctorate, yeah. I didn't get in this year. I've applied for 4 universities. I've been offered an interview in one of them,
Hmm.
which unfortunately I was not successful. At the very start, when I found out, I was upset.
Of
Naturally, you've
course you
gotten
were.
so far and so close,
Yeah.
and you didn't get in. Uh,
Yeah.
I was unhappy for 2 days, and then I started really thinking about it. And you know what? It is probably something that no one would be, or very few people would be very brave to admit, that I felt a sense of relief.
Right.
I felt a sense of relief because although clinically I think I'm in the right place and this is the next step, this is the gold standard, many people don't realize that entering that course is such a difficult experience. It's life changing, the amount of deadlines and the pressure that you'll be under. It is very intensive,
Yeah.
and it would challenge your core identity whether this is really for you. Not just
Yeah.
because everybody talks about how great it is or because you want to help. You really just have to have that identity, that dedication to do this. It's not
Mm.
something you do just because it pays well
Yeah.
or just because it's the next thing for you to do or it's the natural transition to progression in the career.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, one of the recent people I spoke to for
Mm,
the channel um, was saying that she worked for maybe about 7 years as an
mm-hmm,
assistant psychologist
mm-hmm.
um, before starting clinical training, and quite deliberately.
Mm,
Um, she was in no rush and really enjoyed working in different
yeah,
services, getting different experiences,
yeah,
and was able to reflect on how useful that was
yeah.
when she then was doing her clinical training. And I
Yes,
think
you're
we can get caught
absolutely
up,
right.
can't we? I think it's really disappointing that you can only
Yeah,
apply once a year.
yeah.
It's not like applying for jobs where you can just
Mm,
keep looking
mm,
and keep
yeah.
applying. Like if you don't do it
I
this year, it's a
definitely
long
agree.
time to wait, isn't it?
Yeah. And you
But
know what? I'm not innocent in that because when I graduated, um, I was very impatient. I just want to do this. I just want to get it done and over with. I just wanted to, after a year of graduating, I just wanted to be an assistant psychologist, almost right out of university. And even a year doing that, as you know, it's mostly fixed term contracts. Even when I finish a contract, I thought I was just gonna get in. They warned you in university that being a clinical psychologist is very difficult and it's very competitive. I thought to myself at that time, any career would be difficult. There will be challenges in any careers. Why is this any difference? And thinking about that now, if I'd have spoken to that same version of myself, he would get a right telling off. He'd get a right telling off. And I never imagined myself to say that I felt relieved that I didn't get in. It
Yeah,
was an experience. I loved being interviewed for it. I think that was one of the most inspired interviews I've ever done in my life. I think I did a fantastic job, but I felt short, didn't get in, and although that's very disappointing, it was quite a relief. And I'm in a privileged position also to say that because I'm in a very rare post where it's a permanent contract. So I don't have the financial worries that I'll be
yeah,
unemployed at the end
yeah.
of my contract. As I mentioned earlier, also I'd be starting with a very new department. Well, I started in a very new department. How many applicants are able to say that I contributed to a brand new service, to build the brand new service, to stabilize it,
Yeah, yeah,
and the fantastic work of not just doing emotional work, talking therapies, or formulations. I also have to do neuropsychological assessments. I
mhm,
also assist in rehabilitation efforts. I work with all of the professionals in the NHS you can think of, OTs and physios mainly. We have speech and language therapists. You know,
mhm.
um, I would also be working with nurses, doctors, dietitians, you name it.
Yeah,
I'm in a very privileged position and I am very grateful for that. But
yeah,
equally, I don't think I'd be in the position where I am right now if I wasn't brave enough to try any position that would get me close.
yeah. And I love the way you've done that, that you didn't go straight from your degree to an assistant psychologist post, that, you've worked with some different populations, you've taken on some different roles. Because I think, and hopefully I don't sound too patronizing,
Yeah.
but when we're young, everything is experience, everything is kind of new
Mhm.
and different. And whether it's working with autistic students, whether it's working with older people with mental health problems,
Mm.
whether it's working with homeless people,
Mhm.
people with addiction problems, all of that is going to give us a lot of transferable skills, a lot
Yes,
of a lot of that
definitely.
kind of real like hands-on
Yeah.
experience, which, like you say, sometimes it's a lot messier than
Mm.
the textbooks that we read. Um, I remember being early on in my journey, and cognitive behaviour therapy was one of the dominant models on my training course.
Yeah.
And reading these extracts in my textbooks of cognitive behaviour therapy sessions, and it was all so neat and tidy, and within 2 pages they'd resolved something. And it wasn't like that in the sessions that
No.
I was doing with people, probably partly because I was new to it and not very good at it,
Yeah.
and also because the person sitting opposite me was more complicated than
Yeah.
this fictional person in the
Yeah,
textbook.
it's very
Um,
interesting you say that. And to be honest, I'd be lying if I said I didn't try getting into an assistant psychologist role as soon as I got out of university. Believe me, I tried. Um, and it was frustrating to begin with because this is the perfect thing for a fresh graduate to do. Actually, in theory it is, but actually we've got a long way ahead of us. For
Yeah, and that's not like none of it's time wasted, is it? That experience you had, those
Definitely
roles that were
not.
not assistant psychologist
Yeah.
posts, taught you a lot, showed you a
Yeah.
lot. You're taking all that knowledge and experience, and I think I was saying to you before I hit record that
Mm.
similarly for me, I worked on mental health wards whilst I was doing my degree and before I became an assistant psychologist. And that experience of just being with people, having conversations with people, understanding what was important to them, um, that's really informed the way that I work with people, the way that I still will prioritize
Yeah.
building a relationship with people, understanding what's important to them. Um, it's sometimes I think it's clinical psychology is a slightly odd profession because it's got this kind of doctoral status to it. It's very academic, it's very intellectual,
Yeah,
but at its heart, we need to be approachable people. We need to be good
we
at
need to.
talking with people. We need to be friendly. We need to. I think we do best when we're down to earth.
Yes,
Um,
we need to be very grounded, and that's a very important part of the process. And you know, there is a book called Feedback That Sticks. One of the things that I came across quite early on as an assistant psychologist. It's essentially a book where the authors have interviewed hundreds or a lot of psychiatrists and clinical psychologists in America, and I think all over the world, if memory serves me right. And in America, one of the things that they do to gain legitimacy is not just by having the doctor title, is by having their diplomas displayed very visible to the patients. And you know, one of the experiences I had quite early on, I was very young, um, obviously had a very baby face at that time. People would always respond in sometimes because I was working with older age, they always say, you don't understand. You've only lived for a few years. And you know, you're right in saying that it's not as tidy as the textbooks tell you to, you know, that they teach you. It's very tidy, it's role playing. You don't know what they're gonna come up with.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
you know, I worked with functional neurological disorders in my previous role, and every day is going to be something new.
yeah,
And one of my supervisions that really resonates is ask them, what can you do for them today?
yeah. Nice.
And often that would inform what model was going to be appropriate today, and how
Yeah,
would that tie in nicely to the greater goal of being in therapy.
yeah, yeah. I often think like that in my work. We've got our kind of overall
Yeah,
kind of plan for
yeah.
therapy, but we need to hone in on today. You know, for example, if someone's just been fired from their job,
Mm.
they're probably not in a place to follow up on the work that we'd started last time.
Yeah,
They're going
absolutely.
to be in crisis mode and might need
Yeah.
some calming down. Patrick, one last question for you. What would your advice be for students interested in careers in psychology?
I would say probably there are three things that I would say in as an advice to them. One is think about psychology as your friend. I am a very centrist in terms of politics, in terms of career and everything. And I think that resonates as a psychologist. We have to be aware of our own biases. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be aware of our own interests, what triggers us, what experiences are difficult for us, and what are easy for us. And it's very important to know all of that because, as I mentioned earlier, you'll be working with doctors, you'll be working with nurses, therapists, social workers, you name it. A psychological formulation, which is very important in almost anything that we do, would have to find a balance in all of it. So we have to be open and we have to be acknowledging to all of that and appreciate those differences. And that's
Yeah,
not going to be possible if you don't know yourself.
yeah, nice.
That's that's one. The second thing is if you really decided that you want psychology and this is for you, don't be afraid. Ask, do, and speak to people.
Mm,
Sometimes your least expected person would be giving you the answers that you need.
yeah,
And sometimes don't always expect answers because there isn't always one.
mm,
And sometimes it's just feeling it. So don't be afraid, ask.
yeah, lovely.
And finally, do it. Just do it. Simple as that. Like Nike tells us, just do it.
Just do it. Just do it.
Because if you're having hesitations about something, that's not for you. But if you really want it and you do it, you may fail, sure, but your failures are going to teach you more than a success would.
Yeah.
So just do it. Don't be afraid. Just do it. And even if you think it's not what you need, or it's not a fancy psychologist title, it doesn't mean it's not applicable. Just do
Yeah.
it.
I love that. You're the first person I've spoken to for the channel that has made me think we're going to need to get you back.
I'd love to. Thank you
That
very much.
I think it would be super cool to speak again in a year or two,
Yeah,
see
yeah,
where you're at, see where you're up to. You could, because you're so early in your career,
yeah, yeah.
I feel like, the older ones like me, that we're not so interesting. We don't need us to come back. We can tell our story once. But, you absolutely are that work in progress. So I'd love that if we could keep in touch
Oh,
and do
I look
this
forward
again.
to that. And yeah, well, you have me on LinkedIn, you have my email. My email's probably going to change, obviously, depending on work and whether you get into a
Of
doctorate.
course,
But this
of
time
course.
next year, I hope I'll be speaking from a perspective of someone who's looking forward to matriculating,
Yeah,
or at least
nice.
just started in the training.
Yeah. I'm going to stop recording now, but thank you again for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.